the clear winner. Amazing. Thank you guys for coming out. Thank you so much to Join. Everybody raise your glasses one more time to Join. Amazing.
Okay, I'm here to talk about the evented web. Pretty much, there's a problem. Stuff is happening on the internet, and you want to do stuff when that stuff happens. Very descriptive description, very technical. I hope everyone can grok that. First, a warning. Unexpected presentation is unexpected.
Is your microphone on?
Hello, hello. Can everyone hear me all right? All right, so like I was saying, stuff is happening on the internet, and you want to do stuff when that stuff happens. A bit of a warning, I did not think I'd be presenting today. I didn't even think I would be here. The tickets sold out for JSConf before I bought one. I came down on Friday. I wanted to party with you guys, meet some people. And I was lucky enough to win ScurvyConf, so I'm here today. There's going to be some badly created slides, which I made last night on the boat and this morning. And I'm a little nervous, so just bear with me. Webhooks. Okay, so in the world of the evented web, it's really all about webhooks. So what is a webhook? There's no RFC for webhooks. There's no standard definition. There's no committee. Most people have dealt with webhooks before if you do web development. Usually they're presented as a RESTful webhook. There's a bit of information out about this at webhooks.org. Jeff Lindsay is kind of the pioneer working with this stuff. I haven't seen much other information out there. And yeah, the definition of a webhook is kind of ambiguous right now. So most people think of RESTful webhooks. You have an arbitrary URL. That's not a real URL. Don't go there. And it's just sitting there, and it's waiting for an HTTP request. When the HTTP request comes in, some arbitrary action is going to happen. And this is kind of how most people think of webhooks today. So I kind of disagree with this. RESTful webhooks are not webhooks. They're a type of webhook. They are a of webhook. Yes. Excellent. So yes, a RESTful webhook is just a type of webhook. So we're going to kind of restate our assertion here. Stuff is happening on the internet, and you want to do stuff when that stuff happens. So an incoming HTTP request does count as stuff. But there's way more things that you could be listening for, not just an incoming HTTP connection. So first, who is this guy with the Domo hat, and who let him on stage? Hi. My name is Marak Squires. I'm a software developer from NYC. I participate in the NYC JS group a little bit. This is my GitHub. I don't do Twitter. I have a fake Facebook. You can't find me. So yeah, check me out on GitHub. I've been involved in a few internet hijinks for those who know me. They're not really appropriate to be speaking about here. I've been banned from most online services at least once. That's the ban hammer. I even got banned from GitHub. They unbanned me, thank you very much. For those who don't know the story, I created a bit of a script that forced people to watch a library that I created, and it went pretty far before they caught on. But yeah, so I'm not going to do that again, because getting banned from GitHub would probably be problematic. And I won ScurvyConf because I could yell louder than everybody else. So also, I'm here because of Hookio, which is a product or a open source project that I've made. I like to call it Yahoo Crackpipes. The website's up right now. It's hook.io. It's pretty rudimentary. You'll probably be able to break it if you try hard enough. So I'm going to give you a very brief history of Hookio. This is the GitHub commit log. I've got 88 watchers. I'm pretty proud of that. They're legitimate watchers, not ones that I forced. You can see from the commit log, I actually do have a full-time day job, which I'm not allowed to work on other projects, so you can kind of see I don't sleep much. This is Hookio, the main application. It's about, yeah, 9,000 insertions. This is the front end for Hookio, another 7,000 or so. And I started this project 2 months ago, and the first line of code was written 2 months ago. So it's been pretty busy for the past 2 months with all of these commits. And yes, so what's Hookio? Hookio is a few things. Hookio is a standalone server. Hookio is a common JS module. Hookio is a freemium software as a service. Hookio is open source, MIT licensed. And Hookio is a standard interface for building WebIO. Okay, so, oh, one more thing. Hookio is 100% JavaScript and node.js. Node.js owns your face. That's Ryan, as you can see. So I didn't really explain anything. I just kind of threw out a bunch of buzzwords. So yes, what exactly is Hookio aside from these things I just described? Well, Hookio is a webhook platform. And yes, platform is probably a terrible word to use. Maybe it's an application framework, but let's not get boggled down by the semantics. Hookio is going to listen for stuff to happen on the internet, and when that stuff happens, it's going to do other stuff. So in the world of Hookio, we have two main concepts. We have webhook definitions, and we have webhook protocols. A webhook definition comes in two different flavors. There's a webhook listener and a webhook action. Webhook definitions are common JS modules. So pretty much what happens with a webhook is that it's going to listen for an action or an event, and when that happens, it's going to perform an event or an action. Arbitrary. It doesn't matter what it listens for, and it doesn't matter what the action is going to be. So for the most part, when I say listening, there's two ways that Hookio can listen for events on the internet. It can poll, which is not really a traditional way of listening since it's actually going out and polling a resource. But what happens is that Hookio can actively request a resource on an interval, which is polling, and it's going to listen for a change, listen for content, listen for something. Or Hookio can use sockets. Hookio will open up a socket and wait for data. So if you think of a RESTful webhook, that's really just an HTTP socket waiting for an incoming connection. Actions. So in a webhook definition, we have actions. Well, what are they? They're just arbitrary actions. They can be literally anything. It doesn't even need to be over the wire. It could be something for system administration. Who knows? In most cases, it will be an outgoing HTTP request. So kind of look at a little bit of code here. This is a sample Hookio webhook listener. This is for incoming HTTP requests. So if you take a look at this code, there's not really too much going on here. We define the definition, we give it a configuration, and then we give it a handler. Here we have a Hookio webhook custom action definition. And again, there's not really much going on here. This is for sending emails. And all we have is a config for to, and then the body. It's very simple. I don't think we have a subject in here yet. And yeah, as you can see, these are just common JS modules and a little bit of JSON in a definition. So it doesn't really look like they do anything. It just looks like their configuration and validation options. And that's kind of the whole point, is that all the business logic is offloaded to something we call Hookio protocols. And probably not the best word. A lot of the problem with working on this project has kind of been defining new definitions as we go along. So a Hookio protocol is just a cluster of business logic for doing stuff. In most cases, your Hookio protocol would be a thin wrapper for communicating with a third-party API. Also, Hookio protocols are valid common JS modules. So what protocols are available in Hookio, the first version? We've got a bunch of stuff in here. We can parse HAML, Markdown, Mustache. We can communicate with S3. We can communicate with Twitter, their streaming API, and their plain API. We have a timer, which is what a lot of the polling is based off of. It's an interval. We have a documentation protocol, which is pretty sweet. I recently just got Mint going. I don't know if you guys know about this. It's a documentation project for node.js applications and JavaScript applications, which is pretty sweet. So the documentation protocol, every time Hookio starts up for the first time, we actually auto-generate the documentation based on some static Markdown files and then based on the exports from our common JS modules. So if you're making changes in the code and you restart the application, it's auto-documented instantly, which is pretty neat. And again, protocols are just clusters of logic. So for instance, the HTTP protocol handles incoming HTTP connections and outgoing HTTP connections. But you can make a Hookio protocol for anything. OK, so let's back up a second. How did I build all of these protocols and write 15,000 lines of code in 2 months? I didn't. The trick is submodules. Node.js has a really strong community, and there's a lot of really good people doing really good work. And I've just been stealing it all. So, but going back to protocols, this is kind of what we have right now. And what we're planning for the next release, we're going to have GitHub API access. We're going to have a Git protocol for doing system-level Git stuff. Working on a really cool RSS burner parser for aggregating a bunch of RSS feeds. We want to integrate with the Facebook Connect API. And then some of the really interesting stuff is I've been working with my friend Eli, who did JS Dom. He goes by TempVar if anybody knows him. We're working on doing server-side support for YUI, which came out a few weeks ago, jQuery, and just HTML parsing. So the interesting thing here is that we can begin to scrape pages and then perform client-side selectors server-side. So you don't need to learn any new selector library. If you're familiar with jQuery or Sizzle or YUI, you can start to use that stuff server-side. So I'm sure a lot of people here have had to deal with scraping static web pages, and it's a pain in the ass. The traditional approach is, Perl and a whole bunch of regex going back a few years, and it just doesn't work. So being able to leverage some of these existing technologies, which have been really well defined on the front end, is a very interesting thing. So yes, the Node community is awesome. I've gotten a lot of help. There's a lot of really good people writing modules. GitHub is pretty amazing as well. Everyone's on GitHub that's involved with the Node community. I don't need to tell you guys how GitHub works. I like to think I'm a core contributor, but I haven't submitted anything to Node itself. I just yell at other people to fix their modules, which is kind of fun. I'm in the IRC room all the time. I might be the most active person there, in there right now. I'll go back to that. So Hookio, the development plan. Like I stated before, really, I'm not trying to reinvent any wheels. People are doing really good work, and I just want to leverage that. So the current plan is to just fork and steal all of the best common JS modules, and then fork and steal all of the best work from the Node community. And then, of course, integrate with every single web service we can find. Create a lot of GitHub issues and hope somebody fixes them. I like to join the GitHub IRC room on occasion and say, hey, I've been creating issues on my GitHub project, but nobody's fixing them. Is GitHub down? Yeah, they don't like that too much. And of course, part of the development plan is to yell at more people on IRC. So now that we've kind of talked about what Hookio is, well, how could we use it? How could I build an application on Hookio as a developer? So first, I kind of want to talk about the Hookio API. So the API for Hookio is exposed through different interfaces. So you can communicate to the API through many different ways. JSON-RPC is the current way that it's exposed, but we'll get a little bit into that later. So at the lowest level, the Hookio API is exposed through a common JS module. So you just require Hookio, the common JS module, and then you have access to Hookio.api, which is the top-level API calls. Some other interesting things is that if you're importing Hookio as a common JS module and you intend to use it in that fashion, you also have access to the underscore library by Jeremy. I don't know if he's in here right now. Underscore is a functional library for JavaScript. It's pretty cool. You have access to the raw DB command. So if you want to bypass the API, you can just go straight to the DB layer and start running queries. You have access to Hookio.debug, which is really neat. It is an alias for node.debug, which is another project I've been working on. It's an asynchronous web console for debugging for node.js. So I also added a few more options for Hookio. You can log to a file, you can log to the console, and of course to the asynchronous web console. And then I've started to add some flow control libraries by Tim Caswell. Step is in there right now, which is pretty neat. So now that we have this idea of the Hookio API, we're going to talk about using Hookio as a software as a service. So like I said before, Hookio is a standalone application, a common JS module, and a software as a service. So that's a little confusing because the name of the project is also the name of the website, which is also the name of the software as a service, which is also the name of the common JS module. So if you want to use the software as a service now, it's available at hook.io as a JSON RPC. We're going to be investigating, exposing it, maybe XML RPC, maybe SOAP. There's a lot of options we could do. Working on JSONP support, so you can start doing some cross-browser stuff. Cross-domain stuff. So using Hookio as a software as a service, you can build a standalone client just on the front, and it's just going to talk over JavaScript. So we have a browser-side JavaScript API, which wraps the Hookio API in JS and then communicates over the JSON RPC. So if you're using Hookio, as a common JS module and you've become familiar with the API calls, it's going to be identical for the JSON RPC. And pretty much anywhere you expose the API through any interface, all the calls are one-to-one. So you don't need to learn different things. So, OK, Hookio as a standalone server. Really simple. All you have to do is just clone it, run the submodule update. We'll be doing packaging for later versions, but for now they're submodules. And then you just node server.js. So the interesting thing here is if you look at the actual server.js file, all we're doing is just requiring Hookio and starting it up. So part of the problem when I've been developing Hookio is that I'm trying to solve a domain problem that isn't very well defined. And what I was hoping is that I would kind of cut my presentation a little bit short, and I want to open this up to a Q&A so we can kind of talk about webhooks and the webhook environment. I know a lot of people here have had to deal with this in applications, and I'm kind of curious and get some feedback about, what do you think of webhooks? What do you think of Hookio? Would you ever consider using a service like it? And what features would you like to see? So if anyone has any questions, I'd like to kind of turn this into a Q&A, if that's, yeah. Anybody?
Yeah. Where do you sort of see the first potential use of this in in the industry? Because right now you just have it as more of a private project, or public project rather, but where do you see it kind of being hooked into?
So if you go to hook.io, there's actually a section called Business Ideas. There's a lot of businesses right now, web businesses, that I consider a subset of Hookio functionality. If you look at something like Bitly, like a URL shortening service, in Hookio, all that is a listener for a unique URL, and then an action which redirects to another URL. So in theory, you just kind of replicated the basic functionality of Bitly right there. And the way that webhooks work in Hookio is that you can chain them. So you have the initial action of an incoming URL and then a redirection. So you could put a couple of hooks in between, and then you could start logging things like analytics, where they came from. And so that's like one specific use case, but there's probably like 8 or 10 of them on there. There's a lot of services right now. Like people are parsing and scraping HTML from sites, and then they're aggregating that data and then pushing it somewhere. Like Hookio could really take over a lot of that stuff. Another question?
So the general purpose of it is to kind of monitor a web page out there, and then when you have some rules or something that once it catches that, then you perform some function or action on that, which can be just about anything.
Sure. So monitoring a web page would be polar. You'd be polling like a static resource. So that's one way that Hookio can listen for things. But again, it can also do sockets. So yeah, you're just like listening for some event, and then you're just going to perform some arbitrary action. So a lot of the use cases, I think, will be for scraping, like you're saying. You can start aggregating information from a static page, or you kind of turn it dynamic. So suppose there was a website you really liked going to, and you wanted to get updates from it, but they didn't have an RSS feed, and they didn't have a mailing list or anything like that. You could set up a poller to check that page, and then when the content updated, you could fire an action, maybe send email, and then it would send you the contents of the page. So,
yeah. With your description there, it almost, I guess I probably want to think more about the similarities between that and something like Hub Sub Hub.
So, of course. So in one of the future versions of Hookio, we haven't really planned it out. I want to make Hookio itself a pub-hub, sub-hub node, I guess. And I don't think it would be very difficult to do, because to just push those messages back and forth is, we already have most of the functionality established.
Yeah, another use case would be, that popped into my head, would be for testing of sites and content on the page.
Like, is the API up.org or something like that?
Yeah, or I mean, if we just do a lot of unit testing at work, and so if we always do the testing prior to pushing the code out. Well, once it's out there, if something changes, if you're including JavaScript from another page that you're using and that's failing to render something, but I guess this would be pre-rendered JavaScript, but yeah. No.
Definitely. Are there any other questions?
Can you do a demo?
Yeah, I can show the live site. I was a little hesitant to do a demo. Hopefully nobody's taken it down yet. So this is the live site right now. I'm going to probably load up the local version. So there's a few things going on here. The site's down, so we'll see if this is up. OK, so we have some API unit tests. I think the last one's failing right now. Awesome. So again, kind of the mantra, when something happens, do something else. So in this case, we'll say a Hookio URL visit. I'll just say blah. And then we'll say do something else. And then we could say perform arbitrary HTTP request. Or we can say send an email. This is always fun, yeah. So I don't think I have send mail set up on this machine, but the idea would be is you configure the listener, and then you configure the action. Gives you a little pretty print confirmation of what's about to happen here. You have your webhook object, you have the listener, and then you have the actions array. So the listener is going to be HTTP, and you're going to listen for the path of blah. So this means an incoming HTTP request with this matching path, And when that happens, we're going to perform these actions, which is going to be send email with the values Marak Squires from President Obama, Hookio is awesome.
What's a protocol and what's an action here?
Okay, so this is, the protocol would be the type. So the type is the protocol, HTTP, and the action protocol would be send email. So in the webhook definition, the listener is going to be listening using the HTTP protocol, which we've defined with these configurations. And then the send email for the action is going to be using the send email protocol, which is a very thin wrapper for my email protocol, which we could probably abstract into something else. And yeah, and then it's going to send it out with this definition. Does that answer your question? And then, yeah, so you create this, confirm, successful hook is successful. And then if we go to /blah, it found the hook. And right now, I don't think it's actually performing the action. It's just kind of bringing it up and dumping it, and that's the action ID. So, yeah. Any other questions?
So I'm curious as to exactly how we get from listening to like actually scraping content, like for pulling the website. Can you give me a little?
So sure, yeah. So it's a little hard to explain without a concrete example to show you, but the idea would be is that when something happens, you would say on a timer, right? So you'd say every 30 seconds, I want to perform and arbitrate HTTP requests, right? So now, what we haven't really set up yet, and which we're really working on for the second version, for the scraping and the server-side DOM parsing, would be on the timer, this would hit the URL every 30 seconds, and then we would have another hook that would be chained onto this. So when the response came back and the timer fired, we would say, take the payload from that HTTP request and then perform some custom validation or parsing on it. And then based off that, we can fire another webhook.
Okay, so you're just chaining them all together as basically.
Yes, that's I didn't really go over it here, but that's really where it's going to be going is some flow control. Many listeners to many actions, and then you can create complex chains. So by creating simple webhooks in a chain, you can really make some awesome functionality. And then, of course, you can start splitting the chain. For the men in the back.
And you can you network Hookio instances so that you can sort of distribute the load?
So there's
mutate.
Totally. So there's two approaches here. You could easily just set up two Hookio instances completely separately and then make them communicate with each other through RESTful webhooks. That's kind of the cheat. You could also, I've been kind of thinking about, I know that Rick over there has been working on something called dealer.js. So like I'm definitely thinking of being able to set up clusters of Hookio servers and then actually have them communicate maybe like through a TCP socket opposed to doing HTTP requests. So there's nothing available right now, but that's definitely planned for the future. Anybody else? Are we done? Great. Well, thanks a lot. I'm really glad you guys voted for me, and I got the opportunity to speak here. And yeah, check out the site hook.io, and check me out on GitHub, Marak. And thank you.